Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you're doing well. In this upload, I'll be talking to you about living rather than existing, which although is something we hear so much all the time, I wanted to revisit and highlight in a metaphysical context. I want to refer to Neville Goddard here because Neville introduces us very early on, if you read his material in chronological order, to the types of skills and abilities that we're born into the physical human world with. He tells us, and we learn from source ourselves, that as emanations of God, of consciousness itself, we take on the likenesses of males and females, and then additionally put on these garments of flesh, human bodies. And although as emanations we now have this whole other human identity, we are as humans infused with this sacred understanding of how physical things come to be in the first place. And so as humans, we begin to re-establish the connection with our dimensionally greater selves. And we're able to test the idea of physical things having an invisible origin, but we move from doing this unconsciously to doing this consciously, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. So Neville, having reminded us about our creative capacity and its function in human context, goes on to give us the methods we can use that enable us to use this capacity consciously, to manifest. In other words, to give objective reality to what consciousness in the form of our dimensionally greater selves impresses on us or transmits to us. And this is what is truly life-changing. And so when you hear statements like, we're living in uncertain times, you're unmoved because you will, using the techniques of prayer like revision, subjective control, or outpicturing, find yourself playing the part of arbiter, able to meet every need for yourself and for those you love, those around you, which is very different from the experience of one who seems to have it all and finds that they suddenly lose it. What we're talking about here is real power to stabilize your time in the world and to enrich it however you see fit. You won't be subject to economic fluctuations or domestic or international unrest and conflict. You'll be living in heavenly places, serene, blissful, fulfilled. So let's dive in. Our entry into the human world as individualized emanations of consciousness are for the purpose of giving expression to consciousness. A lot had to happen to make that possible, which I'm not going into here, but we do the work of giving expression to consciousness through our human bodies and our human lives. We retain our nature as consciousness, so none of our infinite creative potential is lost, but to ensure that things keep going, we are subject to the human experience, and it's one that we're perpetually dissatisfied with. And the agreement between us, these dual emanation human entities, and source, God itself, consciousness itself, is that we will allow God, allow consciousness to make whatever expression it wants to make through us. We recognize that this agreement is fulfilled against a backdrop of the physical world, of the animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms, but we agree to stay central to all of this activity, to accept our dominion over all things as described in the book of Genesis in the Bible, and to let our life story be the vehicle for this experience that God itself is having. And so you and me as emissaries and students, you and I, possess all the authority and ability we need to continue this process of contextualizing consciousness ad infinitum. We're doing this, mind you, at the behest of the Creator, who is the author and the director of this great drama we call life. And this is happening for reasons that we go on to discover as we progress. Neville Goddard refers to the great drama of life a lot, so you can read more about it in his literature. But I'd like you to think about what I've just said for a moment, and you can pause the recording here if you want to, just to let it sink in a bit. And as part of this incorporeal mechanism we're born into. We are cast into roles, and Neville talks about that as well. And the role we're cast into every time is the one that at that time serves the dual purposes of keeping the drama going, but is also most suited to our education on an individual level. And if I went into this in any kind of detail now, we'll be here all day, but I'm sure you know what I mean. So when you think about the vastness of just the physical world and then the global community of billions, it really does boggle the mind. But no matter where we find ourselves and no matter what we find ourselves doing, we are there, we are who we are, and we're doing what we're doing in a manner best suited to the drama itself, the great drama called life, and to us as individuals. But in addition to this, we are who we are, and we're doing what we're doing in a manner that will stimulate the rediscovery of ourselves as emanations of God itself. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but when we come into the physical world, although we retain our nature as consciousness, we lose our memory. So the role we're cast into rather, is best suited to stimulating that rediscovery, the return of our memory. And so it's worth remembering that what appears to be a tough start in life is in fact an opportunity, for you to develop or to expand your creative capacity. Contrastingly, those born into luxury are providing context for your seeming lack, but don't doubt for a moment that they haven't already gone through their own hardships or have it to come. We simply play the part ordained for the reasons I've just outlined. And as Neville says, we play all the parts. So wherever you are and whoever you are now, it best fits what is unfolding in and around you at the time. And as I say, we play all the parts. So everything's fair, everything is just. And when we say creative, we mean generative. When I say we, I suppose I'm talking about the esoteric community, the esoteric world. Creative means generative, So our communication with consciousness is always based on a purpose, on an outcome. It's always based on consummation and production. We don't communicate with consciousness for nothing. We do it, as I say, for a purpose. Something must be produced by the marriage. A child, a something must come out of the union. Now, earthly unions don't always produce issue, which typifies that it's possible for us to come into contact with consciousness and fail to conceive or fail to carry what has been conceived to term. And this goes for everyone, regardless of your human gender. But just as on the human side, we figure out how to fix that, we figure out how to rectify or remedy involuntary childlessness, we can do the same on the metaphysical side, on the dimensionally greater side. We do that through study and experimentation and discussion and whatever it is that works for us, but we figure out how to overcome our difficulties and give human human expression or objective reality to what we have conceived through our contact with consciousness. And so when you think about the whole vast human world, the planet, our human history, our human present, and our potential human future in this metaphysical context, you now realize that manifesting is a big deal. It's a major undertaking. Our participation in it is crucial, but most of all, our ability to use it is proportionate. Because of this nature of ours, that is consciousness itself, we have the ability to play our part in the great drama of life successfully. So hopefully now you see how all of this fits together. Our human bodies that we love so much and hopefully take tremendous good care of, tremendously good care, I don't think that sentence came out wrong. but I hope that we are treating ourselves well, are used for the purpose of giving objective reality to spiritual ideas. Our human bodies are secondary to our dimensionally greater aspects, which means that we cannot rely on our human outlook to tell us what we should be physicalizing. And this is because our human outlook is grossly limited in comparison to our dimensionally greater outlook. And our duty on the human side, our responsibility is to receive this information about what we're supposed to be manifesting from consciousness itself. And this is communicated to us using the spiritual language of emotion. And when we get this information, we consent to its objectification. That's what we're supposed to be doing on the human side. And remember, Neville tells us that the power and plan of fulfillment of any impression, of any desire, is contained in the missive. And so how does manifesting in this way differ from what we call manifesting the small things? And I'm talking about living versus existing. I'll tie everything together. But this is how it's different. As human beings, as I've said, we're infused by consciousness, and we exist in states of consciousness which are psychological frameworks, and that's on the human side. And because of this, there are things that are already immediately available to us. These are the elements of the state in which we live. We have access to certain social spaces just by virtue of who we are. We have access to certain resources and levels of education or wealth and so on. We have certain social experiences and contacts that we may not be aware of all at once, and which, as we get older and move around the planet, they show up in new and exciting ways. But all too often, these new experiences are labeled manifestations rather than being identified as things that are normal and natural to the state we exist in. Neville also refers to this as increased exposure through awareness. So as a being of consciousness, albeit in human form, if we can think of something, and we do think of things, it's because they are already alive in our state of consciousness. And even though you might be thinking about something not immediately apparent to you, or something that you can just reach out and touch in any given moment, that doesn't mean that the thing you're thinking of is not readily available to you. So what happens is, when you get hold of something new, something that has always been available to you even though you weren't aware of it, you believe that you have manifested. But that sort of unconscious operation of the law is existing. That's part and parcel of just existing. And it's possible to exist like this for the duration of a lifetime, and many of us do. But to live, particularly to the standard we are capable of, demands that we employ the conscious use of imagination. And we only begin that process when we test our creative ability in outstanding ways, when we seek to objectify or physicalize things that exist way outside of the realm of what is normally possible for us as human beings. On the human side, this takes tremendous courage. We're consenting to give objective reality to things that could have a potentially devastating impact on us, which is why we have to learn to trust our dimensionally greater selves. So this shift from existing to living starts with observation. It's time spent thinking about your life in its entirety as it presently is, thinking about everything and everyone available to you. And then push a little further, dig a little deeper, and as Neville says, become a little more honest about what you could probably do and probably have if you put your mind to it, what you could achieve with some effort. And you'll probably be, pleasantly surprised. And so you might also want to think about the things that you feel you've manifested over time in this context. And all of this that you become aware of is your existence, in your current state. So all of those things that I've described, the things that are available to you, the things that you could have if you tried, if you put your mind to it, the things that the people that are around you and so on, all of this is your existence. They are the elements of your existence in your current state. And this is why Neville tells us that changes in state produce corresponding changes, corresponding changes in what is available to us. I'll say that again. Neville says that changes in state produce corresponding changes in what is available to us. So when you've done that, and I won't prescribe how long you should spend doing it because it will be relative, think next about something you believe you could never have, be, or do under any normal circumstance. And as you go from being aware of what is available to you to being aware of something that seems to be unavailable to you, you will notice that you feel uncomfortable. The sensation that comes on you will be an uncomfortable sensation. And don't neglect to use your body as apparatus in this. Notice if you're feeling queasy, whether your heart is racing, whether you feel lightheaded or irritable and so on. These are all signals that you're now wrestling with your dimensionally greater self. You're jostling for power. And it's because your dimensionally greater self has a different relationship to this new desideratum than your limited human aspect does. Okay, so think about that for a moment. But on the human side, your job here is to accept this transmission, accept that this thing that seems completely impossible to you is possible to you. And once you've accepted it, you consent to it. And that is what manifesting is. And that is the key to living rather than existing. As you consent and physicalize these new seemingly impossible things, you are manifesting, and you will, in a metaphysical context, begin the process of living. A manifestation, esoterically speaking, is something that challenges you emotionally, resourcefully, psychologically, and so on, because the intent of manifestation is to restore your memory, and it needs a trigger, a stimulus strong enough to do so. Another person cannot do this for you. Someone cannot have this experience for you. This is not what guided meditations can do for you. Things like guided meditations have a different function. No one can have this experience for you because God ordained it that way. And so Neville tells us to dream bigger than the best we have ever known. And he gives us tools. He gives us techniques and methods to help us until the time we have fully activated the gifts that we were all born with. At that stage, we will have learned to have deferred to our dimensionally greater selves. We will have established an unshakable and a complete connection between the two aspects of ourselves. We'll be highly proficient in the spiritual language of emotion on the human side, which means that with all I've just said, we're now thinking in concert with our dimensionally greater selves. Even though we're human and we remain subject to all of the normal and natural human appetites and limitations while we're in the physical world, we're constantly dreaming bigger, wanting more, doing more, and ultimately achieving more. So whether you're thinking about retraining in a new profession, running for public office, starting some grassroots movement, or maybe you want to set up a domestic or international corporation, or maybe you just want to be famous, whatever it is, you're going to do it now with an appreciation for and an understanding of what the purpose of this objective is. And you're doing it on the human side as a willing participant. And when you do that, you will be compensated with everything you could ever think you would need. So let's talk a moment about what it means to think in concert with your dimensionally greater self. When I was impressed to start my YouTube channel, or impressed upon rather, to start my channel, I didn't really want to do it, but I did it willingly. I upload the information I do, it reaches the people it's sent for, and now every day of my life, I receive the blessing of playing my part. And I'm not going to go into what those blessings look like, but they are tremendous. Today, I'm having new experiences and moving in directions I hadn't considered before. And I'm so excited about this because I'm now on the receiving end of new mind, body, and soul expanding experiences that are part of my overall lived human experience. And Neville tells us that one of our duties is to have as many experiences as we can fit into a lifetime. And the reason we do this is because every experience teaches us something new about what we're capable of. And at the same time, we're giving new expression to the formless, as I've spoken about before. But this won't happen for us if we don't accept what manifesting truly is or what it's for. It's not simply access to the resources you're born into or exercising the existential freedoms you're born with. That's existing. It's achieving the unimaginable without those things and against those restrictions. So don't get me wrong, I understand the role of the differences between us as human beings and how it is we play supporting cast members for each other until it's our turn to step into the starring role. But at the moment we become aware of our ability and authority to tell consciousness itself what shape to take, and it obeys us, in that moment it's game on. Our limitations are in fact education, and our successes are inspiration. So your success as someone who comes from absolutely nothing will mean far more to the rest of us than the success story of someone who has everything to begin with. And when the time comes, the roles will be reversed. So everything is just and everyone gets a fair chance. But I want you to take that correlation between what you feel and what you experience and put it to the ultimate test. I've lost track of the number of messages that begin with, Kate, I can manifest small things, but I can't seem to get the bigger things done. And that's because the small things are the product of the unconscious use of the law. Manifesting small things is done simply by existing. True manifesting, as I call it, requires that you give to yourself things that you could not possibly have or do under normal circumstances. That is living. And I'm pausing for effect. I want those things to really drive home. So to wrap up this presentation, my encouragement to you is to go back to first principles, spend some time in contemplative thought about your whole life and notice what has remained the same for you throughout the course of it. And then think about something you'd like to do or to be or to have, which seems impossible for you under any normal circumstance. And then as you're thinking about this new thing, notice the emotional wrestling that ensues. That's a good sign. This wrestling is a signal that your dimensionally greater self is active in this process. And then what you're going to do is use any technique of prayer you want to use, or develop a technique of your own if you need to. But set your sights on giving objective reality to what it is that seems to be impossible. In practical terms, you have all of the tools you need to do this. The reason the techniques of metaphysical prayer seem to fail is because they are not being used for the correct purpose. It's a bit like putting the wrong fuel into a vehicle. The stimulus needs to be strong enough for the prayer to work. So employ the techniques of prayer to outcomes worthy of their use. Think about what you've been told you could never have, never be, or never do, and then give those things to yourself. Then and only then will you begin to live fully and well. And ultimately, you'll trigger the divine event that was promised to us from before the world began. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I look forward to being with you in the next upload. Remember to ask any questions, make any comment below as usual. If you feel like doing so, please subscribe to the channel, like, share, and all the rest of it. Until we are together again, stay phenomenally you.